Hello, I'm Mandy McLeod. Welcome to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. Coming up, increasing rates of divorce and marital discord in Canadian producers is due to the inability of farm founders to create a new identity beyond the business. This is according to best-selling Canadian author and farm family business coach Elaine Froese. We ask why. Dairy farmers get an 18-month reprieve from Fonterra to finish fencing off waterways. And farm debt, we look at the latest research from MAF Policy. Joining me today is Elaine Froese, a Canadian grain farmer and farm family business coach, and Phil Jeannot, manager of the North Island regions for MAF Policy. Welcome.
Thanks, Mandy.
Thanks, Mandy.
Welcome to New Zealand, particularly to you, Elaine. You've only just arrived. And I just wanted to ask you, Phil, you've been looking at farm debt.
The issue, Mandy, is we've got a big farm debt level and it isn't going away. Aggregate debt is for agriculture is $47.5 billion. Last year, farmers paid off $1.3 billion, which is good stuff, but they also managed to borrow $900 million more. So the net effect was minor. The issue has tended to fade because incomes were up last year and it looks good for this year. But there's a significant proportion, 20% of farmers, have got a huge debt, and if the payouts drop, they will be in trouble.
How do you think we're planning for this, or do you think we're planning for it at all?
Well, I think people are much more aware of it, but in saying that, I'm not quite sure we're doing much planning around it either.
Why do you think that is?
Well, combination of factors. I guess the big one, as I mentioned, was incomes are up, and then the problem fades. And it's not really until incomes drop and you're under severe pressure that people start thinking about it.
Elaine, how does this compare with Canada? Are farmers or producers there a lot more in tune with their debt, or because there's so much leased land in Canada, their level of indebtedness is not as high as potentially what it is here?
It's very hard to generalize, Mandy. I work with Farm Debt Mediation Service as a mediator. And so what we find in mediation, the people who are coming into voluntary mediation to get their debts rearranged, a lot of it is sector specific. So you understand we've had BSE in Canada in 2003, and that's 8 years ago, but it's still having a huge impact on the recovery process for particularly beef producers. The hog sector is really hurting. Supply management doesn't seem to have debt issues, although their debt issue is different than what you're mentioning, because their debt issue is in terms of succession planning and getting finance for quota and things like that. So every sector has its own limitations and challenges, but in the grain industry, like in New Zealand, the same things happened the last few years. The commodity prices have been quite great, and so people get sort of bolstered up and say, oh, I can go get this new tractor, I can do this. And the farm management specialists that I work with across the country, their key message is, guys, just look at your numbers and don't forget to pay attention to the numbers and really understand what those numbers are telling you. And there'll always be the 80-20 rule. 80% of the farmers are in a different scenario than the 20% that are managing really, really well and producing 80% of the crop for all of the country. So it's just very specific to what sector you're in and whether or not you're paying attention to the numbers.
Phil, I'm guessing that our farm debt, like the dairy, holds the most. With PSA and the kiwi fruit becoming a lot more of an issue, not that it hasn't been, but we're really starting to see the impacts of it, especially in the growing season coming up. Do you think this is going to affect New Zealand economy, potentially, if we start to see a drop in the dairy prices?
Going back a step, Mandy, dairy farmers own 66% of that $47.5 billion, so it is very much a dairy industry factor. If commodity prices drop, I mean, that in itself affects the economy. In terms of the impact on those highly indebted farmers, the impact's really on them, because at the end of the day, they may be forced to sell up. Someone comes in, buys the land. So the land and the cows, if you like, will still stay.
Right. Yeah, that's a fair point.
It's the individual that takes the hit.
Yes, yes, which is going to be quite stressful in itself. Now, that leads me on, Elaine. One of the things that you have said, particularly in your book, and I think an article that you've written recently, is that you've got increasing rates of divorce and marital discord in Canadian farms, and you particularly talk about it being the first founders. Can you just talk a little bit about what's really causing that disharmony? What are the triggers and what's actually happening about it?
Well, I think a lot of people, when the new daughter-in-law shows up on the farm, they get excited, right? Oh, what's this woman going to do to our farm? And what I'm finding in my coaching practice is I'm working with a 62-year-old farmer or a 70-year-old, and I'm looking at him and saying, look, your spouse has given you and the farm the 50 best years of her life. When is it her turn to get what she wants? And right away he's going like this, and she's going, yay, yay. And I'm saying, whoa, whoa, this is the issue, isn't it? And the issue is in coaching we always say you're not going to move towards something unless you have something exciting to move towards. So according to the research from Baker in Iowa, is 30% of farmers never retire. And I tease the farmers in Canada, no, you're not retiring. But you do need to reinvent yourself.
Yes.
So I use the term reinvention as a coach. And I say, what is your role going to be once you've passed on management and ownership, or parts of ownership, that you feel good about? And the role for him is very undefined, which is the huge problem, because he doesn't know. And he hasn't worked on that. And the role thing for her is really a bigger problem, because it's the impact on the marriage. She's really tired. She doesn't want the farm to be Grand Central Station anymore. And she's ready to move off the main yard. And in Canada, the farms, of course, are much bigger size and different geography and all that good stuff. And quite often it's the main yard where all the action is, and that's where the next generation needs to come to. And in other cases it isn't. The younger generation commutes, and it's all different depending on the situation. But back to divorce, is that a lot of women in their mid-60s or early 70s are saying enough. And I tease my audiences when I speak professionally to them. I say, it's because they've been watching too much Oprah. They've got permission to have the life they've always wanted. But I don't joke about it, because if you have a strong foundation in the partnership or the marriage, then of course you're going to be paying attention to what really needs to be done.
Before we go to the break, I just want to quickly touch on Fonterra chasing up the last 20% of its dairy farm supplies that haven't fenced off waterways. Phil, why do you think they've just suddenly decided to get tough?
Combination of things, Mandy, but I guess the big thing is the societal pressure. The dirty dairying and all the rest, it's been building in New Zealand for years. There's a lot of pressure on the industry, and I think Fonterra sort of grasped the nettle and said, guys, we've got to sort this out.
Do you think they're a paper tiger in this, though? If the other companies aren't really getting their suppliers to do this, have they got the teeth to get into those 20%? Or should I be really hard and say they're probably the 20% they don't really want anyway?
Well, who knows, Manny? No, they're certainly not a paper tiger. I mean, the ultimate threat, I guess, is we just won't pick up your milk.
But can they do that under the Constitution?
Well, my understanding at this point in time is no, but you can change that. You can change the law, and it comes back to the sort of contractual relationship between Fonterra, the company, and the shareholder, in terms of the supplier, and the contract around, yes, we'll pick up your milk, but these are some of the conditions you have to meet.
Elaine, do you know if that's becoming a big issue in Canada, where farmers are being, I won't say forced, but coerced into fencing off waterways?
Well, we like to take a different approach and be more proactive rather than reactive. And of course, there's incidents everywhere. But in Canada, we have what's called the Environmental Farm Plan. And so the government has coaxed people through subsidies of money, say, for fuel tanks, or putting riparian zones around creeks, and making sure that the cattle don't come right down to the creek beds, and they're fenced off, and there's pumping systems. And so there's some support monetarily for that to happen. And good stewardship practices are really, really key. And just because we're a vast country doesn't mean we can be foolish with our resources, and land stewardship is very important in sustainability
and
as
I think part of the key there is in around the monetary contribution, which unfortunately we don't get here. Coming up after the break, the power of protein. Is this a forgotten key ingredient for muscle mass in older adults? According to research from Fonterra, it is. We ask why the Chinese are more attuned to this than most Westerners. By next year, Western Canadian farmers will be free of the wheat board's monopoly and will no longer be forced to sell their wheat and grain through the agency. What will this really mean for growers? And climate change, coupled with poor farming practices, has contributed to the decline in productivity of the world's farmland. This is according to a new UN report. So how will we feed the growing population? All this when we return. Welcome back to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. Consumer research carried out by Fonterra reveals big international differences in the role of protein in the diet. Chinese consumers seemingly want more protein, whilst Germans, for example, aren't bothered. Phil, why do you think it is that the Chinese are so much more conscious about protein for muscle mass, which we know we need more of as we age, than I guess Westerners?
Well, Mandy, I can't say I'm an expert in this area, but I think there's a number of factors there. One, I mean, the Chinese civilization is a lot older than ours, and these are the sorts of things that I guess have developed over time. The other thing I'd say, though, is all things being equal, Westerners are not lacking protein in their diet. In fact, we've probably got too much. Whereas historically, well, certainly in the last 100 years, Chinese have been lacking in protein. And one of the big things we're seeing in terms of, say, New Zealand trade is that massive increase in effect, protein sales, milk and meat, into China.
It's interesting because in the Fonterra research, what came out was it wasn't necessarily meat protein that had the highest value for ageing muscles. It was actually dairy protein. So I found that interesting with the Chinese diet, which is possibly less, like you said, protein loaded, that potentially they're more aware of the dairy protein. And I wondered why that was the case, or whether it is just, as you say, a growing civilization trend.
Who knows? But I guess at the end of the day, the more Chinese that eat dairy products, drink milk, the better it is for New Zealand. So, as far as I'm concerned, go for it.
Because I was wondering, and Elaine, I don't know what your comment is on this, whether as Westerners we're becoming a bit more reliant on pills and potions, going to a health food shop and being seduced into buying vitamins and minerals and protein shakes instead of actually getting it the good old-fashioned way through our diet.
Well, I've done work with the Dairy Producers of Canada, and they definitely would not carry that message. And I think that in Canada, what we're seeing in terms of food trends and nutrition is people are wanting to know more where their food comes from and the story behind it, and grow local and all that kind of, the same like the signs I've seen here in New Zealand. But yes, you have to also remember the Zoomers, which are the energetic boomers. And so you have a huge population demographic of people who are living longer and are concerned about their health. And if they think they can do it with a soy milk-based protein shake and, you know, and a dairy one or whatever, they'll try those things out.
One of the things that that I would get shot if I didn't do would be to say that we don't have soy milk in New Zealand. We have soy juice because milk comes from a lactating bovine or a lactating mammal, you see. So I would be shot if I didn't pull you.
Welcome to the country. In Canada, that's what it's called. It has a different label, obviously, for different reasons. No,
yes.
That's good to know.
Yes.
But just a comment from me, Mandy, I mean, I'd agree. I think, you know, people are popping vitamin pills and all the rest of it. And I think that's based on the fact that there's tremendous propaganda around it. And people are forgetting, if you eat a balanced diet, all these pills are not a complete waste of time and money.
Coming back to Canada, Elaine, the Harper government, I believe, has just announced that August the 1st, 2012, is going to see the reversal of a monopoly in barley and wheat sales. This is going to end 7 decades of the wheat board in Canada. How are producers taking this news?
It's, as in my husband's word, the most polarizing issue in the country. You're either really, really for it or really, really against it. And typically the ones that are for it are the farmers who've done their own marketing. And even on our own grain farm, we sow 27 to 30 quarters of grain, and only 3 of that would have been wheat. And that is because we didn't have the choice of how we would market it. But we also use our value-added product to make it into certified seed. Regardless, the bottom line is you'll always have the early adapting farmers who want to be aggressive and do value opportunity. And so now that wheat is going to be free for all in terms of marketing, they're thrilled because there's rumors of mills coming now and durum processing plants, which has all we've been, you know, in the US or other places. So the marketing opportunities for that group of farmers is great. The ones that are really kicking up their heels are over here, and they're the ones who, well, how am I going to market my grain? I've never had to do it myself, and I just kind of drive to the elevator and take the bottom third of the market price and all that other good stuff. I'm sure the farmers here are no different. So it's because you actually have like a camel's hump. You have 2 very separate kinds of farmers. So the ones that are more early adaptive, early innovators, and their own self-marketers, they're just totally thankful at last it's been done. And the ones down here are going like, my life is over. So it's really polarized the country, and it's going to go through. And again, My husband, who does the marketing and manages that side of the business, he just thinks that probably it'll take 3 to 4 years for it to find its new equilibrium.
We've seen this a lot, haven't we? We've seen the deregulation of the dairy industry, we've seen deregulation of the wool board, so potentially there's a lot of things that
have to find the balance.
Yes, I mean, you know, just to echo Elaine's comments, we faced the same angst when we did it, you know, 15, 20 years ago. Farmers got over it, and all things being equal, I'd say we're far better off as a result.
Yes, that's right.
It's deregulation, which most farmers are very in favour of.
Yes.
Yeah, except the older generation who are, you know, have some genuine concerns about how they're going to do it because they haven't done it before.
And fear of the unknown.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. Now, the UN has released yet another report looking at the ability of the world to feed its growing population. In this report, the UN estimates we will have to increase production by 70% by 2050. Phil, how are we going to achieve this, given that this will be the biggest demand in increased production since the Green Revolution?
It's a complex issue, Mandy, and perhaps I could start this off by posing 2 rhetorical questions, if you like. The first one is, can we feed the world in 2050? Short answer is yes, we can. There's the resources there, the technology, the management systems. The second question is, will we feed the world in 2050? And I'd have to say probably not. Mainly, and again, there's a number of reasons, but the main one is the sort of socio-economic political situation in most countries. As an example, if you like, to pick on one, Zimbabwe. 10 years ago, a major food exporter feeding Southern Africa. You've got a dictatorship. They've ruined the agricultural sector, they've ruined the economy. Zimbabwe now has to import food. Coming back, you know, talk about drop in productivity. Certainly farming practices are part of that. The other big one, and there's been some research done around the world, has been the lack of R&D spend in agriculture over the last 15, 20 years. Lack of research and certainly lack of tech transfer.
How are we going to change that? And I say that particularly in light of those 2 questions that you've asked, because in my humble opinion, they are the best questions that I've actually heard asked, Phil, especially that one about the will versus the can.
Yes. Well, I'm not quite sure I've got the answer to that. I mean, if you look at the, say, the Western world, we've got food coming out our ears, mainly because we've sorted out our political system in a sense. And again, you could say, at this immediate point in time, is the world short of food? No, it's not.
It's distribution.
It's distribution.
We've still got 1 billion people going hungry. And the other factor is the estimate, we lose about 30% of the food grown in the world between the farm paddock and the shop.
Yes.
Distribution systems, poor storage, all the rest of it.
That's dead right. Well, there's certainly subject in there for another meaty discussion about how we can achieve what they call sustainable intensification. However, we've got to go to the break. Afterwards, we're going to ask Phil and Elaine what's got them fired up. Is it going to be a rant or will it be a rave? Join us after the break to find out. Welcome back to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. It's time now for our weekly rant and rave. Phil, what have you got?
Well, I was thinking about this driving up, Mandy, and coming back to the issue of, you know, feeding the world. And I guess part of my, I'd have a concern that within the media that there's always the doom and gloom, you know, we're going to starve and there's going to be civil strife and wars and all the rest of it. There's very little discussion around the things we need to solve it, which is a combination of good science, good economics and good politics.
What about good education?
Well, yes, certainly that's part of it in terms of both farmer education, I guess, and the general populace. So it's a problem that, in a sense, could be solved. It's just there appears to be a lack of will to do so.
Do you think that's because the countries that have got the ability to perhaps answer those questions don't have enough food pressure on themselves?
Well, I'm not sure. If you look around the world, I mean, Africa could easily feed itself, could probably feed most of the world. Southern Russia, Ukraine, all that area, tremendous. They've got more potential there than North America. South America is starting to get their act together. Again, incredible potential for food production. I'm not sure it's a food shortage that's driving it. It's just dumb politics.
Dumb politics. I like that, Phil. Elaine, rant or rave?
Well, because this is coming up before Christmas, and my business is called the Seeds of Encouragement. I would like to encourage every farmer watching this, particularly the men, to write their wives and their daughters-in-law a Christmas letter of appreciation. And I just wrote an article on this in a paper that I write for in Canada. And lack of appreciation is something that costs you hugely on your farm in terms of human resources, in terms of succession planning, all kinds of levels. And I think the people issues are the ones that are really stymieing people in agriculture. They're great producers, they get their money in order, they can do all the good technical operational things, but it's the human resources stuff where they're really butting heads with each other. So my encouragement would be write a letter of appreciation to your spouse, to your workers, particularly if those workers are family members. And this came back to me through Country Guide magazine, and I just encourage all the viewers to Google Country Guide magazine Canada, and they can go online and read it. But in this magazine, there was an example of a family that I did actually coach, and it was the father-in-law who wrote his daughter-in-law a letter of appreciation, and that was the tipping point for her to say, yes, I want to be your team player. And it made a huge difference on that farm. And you know, it's just a nice piece of paper in a beautiful envelope under the tree. And that's what I would like to see happen to every farm family in the country.
And it doesn't even cost anything, does it?
Time. Oh, it does. It costs huge. The huge piece is time and intentionality. And it also means it has to come from the heart, it has to be honest, and it has to be real. And I sit around for farmers and they go, oh no, Elaine's coming to the table. And I said, when's the last time you wrote your wife a love letter? And they said, oh, Elaine, I'll just buy her chocolates or I'll take her out for supper. I said, no. I said words of affirmation. You know, and I think I told you this earlier, Mark Twain said that a person can live 3 months on one good compliment. And I call it the emotional bank account of the farm. We talk about the debt and the bank accounts, but I'm working on building up those emotional bank accounts so that when the tough times come, you can still pull something out of there to be resilient. And it seems common sense, but I think the Australians have a saying, you know, common sense, uncommon practice. And that's what we need to do, just need to be intentional. So that's what, it's a combination rant and a rave. Like I want people to do it, but I also want to hear the raving results of what happens when you actually take the time to do it.
It reminds me of one of my favourite Jock cartoons where Jock is saying to his neighbour, I said good morning. What did she want? A conversation?
Exactly.
Or another particular one that from John Baker in America was just, why? I love my wife so much, I almost even told her.
Yeah.
Phil, can you see that idea going down well with our normally emotionally reticent New Zealand farmers?
I'd have to say, well, yeah, most of them are men. I'd have to say, Mandy, I think most of them would struggle significantly, actually. It's a big emotional barrier to get over, yeah.
Okay, say this, I love you.
I love you.
Now, how hard was that?
Not hard at all.
Everybody.
Hey, we caught that on camera.
Everybody.
Just make sure my wife.
Yeah, and my husband too. 3 easy words.
Is there marriage proposal forthcoming here?
And I'm proud of you. And it's been a really hard year. And I know you've struggled, but things are going to be different. And let's carry on the best we can. It's amazing. I have the power actually to make men cry. And I haven't tried it yet in New Zealand, but they tend to let down their guard with me. And because I'm a farmer also and understand what they're coming through, I just say, and now it's time. Yes. You can't just keep pushing this off anymore. The time is now.
Well, I'm very pleased that you haven't exercised that right to make men cry on my show, because I would hate it if Phil suddenly burst into tears.
That's good.
Phil, do you actually think, because this is a topic that obviously, you know, I'm hot on, Elaine, as you know. Do you think that we actually have the words that in our vocabulary, in our I guess particularly in our agricultural vocabulary, that we actually have the words to use?
In terms of expressing the sort of thing that Elaine's talking about, well, I think we do. It's probably not quite in the "I love you" type thing.
It's different.
But the words are there. But to me, I suspect there's a huge barrier for a lot of farmers to express that.
Feel the fear and do it anyway, I say. Okay, that's a really good message. Thank you, Elaine. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
And you too, Phil.
Thank you, Mandy.
That wraps up our latest edition of Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. And again, I'd like to thank my guests, Phil Janot and Elaine Froese, who we appreciate very much. Thanks to you too for watching. We also appreciate you. Remember to check out our website for all kinds of great programming at country99tv.co.nz. I love hearing from you. We'll catch you next week, and in the meantime, keep on smiling.